Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
And it's recording. So Jesse, how do you pronounce your last name?
Fruhwirth.
Fruhwirth.
That's right.
Okay. So I totally lost my train of thought for a second.
Why don't you kind of talk about yourself?
Yeah. Like, you're involved right now heavily in environmental activism. Would that say is your focus right now?
Yeah, I mean, I always do a lot of stuff. So what's been consuming most of my time? It's sort of like asking what is your favorite song or your favorite album. It's like, I don't know, but this is what I've been listening to lately. So the last couple of months I've spent a lot of time on environmental stuff, yes, especially tar sands, which are being developed in Utah, are already obviously hugely exploited and developed in Canada, etc. And we can talk more about that. Also, police brutality issues with the Matthew David Stewart case up in Ogden, and now also I'm working pretty closely with the loved ones of Daniel Willard, who was murdered by West Valley City Police on November 2nd. So
most people outside of the Utah probably won't know either one of those cases.
Sure.
Do you want to expand a little bit on either one of those?
So Matthew David Stewart on January 4, 2012 had about 8 or 9 undercover narcotics cops, or these exist all across the country. They're strike force officers. So it was the Weber Morgan Narcotics Strike Force. Matthew David Stewart's ex-girlfriend had turned him in, saying that he was growing marijuana in his basement. It turns out he probably was. They found 16 plants. Nevertheless, they burst into his house, which for him was the middle of the night because he works graveyards, so he doesn't get up until 10 p.m. They're busting in at 8 p.m. And we'll see how everything works out, but it appears that they probably fired first. Even if they didn't, it's not at all clear that he knew that they were cops. So he's sort of awoken in the middle of the night, and even if he'd had enough time to do this sort of investigation, he could have gone to look at the side door, and none of the cops were in uniform. They have ugly lamb chops and weird goatees, because normally they're doing undercover work, so they look like ruffian thugs. If he'd run to the front door, if he did discern that they were saying police, if they did indeed say they were police, which is not necessarily true, but they say they did. Had he run to the front door and looked out the big bay window, there was no cop cars, no cherries, no cars at all. It's as if this gang of ruffians appeared out of nowhere. And yeah, they're saying they're police, but who
the fuck knows?
Right, exactly. So anyway, Matthew says that, he did not know that they were police. He thought that he was experiencing a home invasion. He defended himself when all was said and done after I think it was about 45 minutes. Matthew was injured nearly fatally. He nearly died this summer in jail. 5 other cops were shot and injured, and 1 cop was shot and killed. And so now he's facing the death penalty for the death of this police officer.
And correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know too much about the case. I didn't follow it too closely since it actually happened.
Right.
But he was a returning vet also, wasn't he?
That's right. Yeah, he was retired Army Airborne.
Okay.
He'd served overseas. And as far as his family understands, as a lot of us probably understand with mental health issues, you don't talk about them, sometimes even with your closest intimates. But it's their understanding he was using marijuana to treat anxiety and PTSD. And, they don't know all the details because very few people talk about these things. But, it seems pretty clear that he was using it medicinally.
I just don't get the justification for the going in. Was it a no-knock warrant? Or
here's the thing.
Originally it was reported as a no-knock warrant.
Right. Don't get too tripped up on the difference between no-knock and knock-and-announce warrants, because in reality they're the same exact thing.
Pretty much, yeah.
Boom, 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 police, and they're through your door. Or there's no boom, boom, boom. It's just
we're
through your door.
Yeah.
Right. But this was a knock-and-announce warrant, which his defense attorneys, I think very wisely, have made an issue of, okay, well, if you were announcing yourselves, why did you show up in unmarked cars, park in the church parking lot way across the street so that no one could even see it, show up not in uniforms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, they say they said police. We're not even sure that's true. They say they knocked. We're not even sure that's true. There was an anecdote during his preliminary hearing in October and November, it was just last month, where the ex-girlfriend had to testify, the snitch in this situation. And there was an anecdote where once she had knocked so hard on his door to wake him up that she ended up breaking the window, and only at that point did he wake up. Well, the cops didn't break the window in knocking, so there's a good chance that he didn't hear them.
Didn't hear him at all, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. Having my house raided by the FBI before in not quite as a bad a situation, I understand the stress of when that immediately happens.
Mm-hmm.
It just blows my mind that, like, in that situation, they didn't have any indication that he was a violent person.
There is no indication.
There was no indication,
right.
yeah.
So
there was no reason to be going in there in full SWAT gear. They could have done a soft take if they needed to.
Right.
Wait till he went to work. And it's just,
exactly.
what the fuck is the point?
This is the way they do things. When you hear the word strike force, they mean it. That's what they do. They strike with force. That's their nature. Now, why they pick on people like Matthew David Stewart, I don't know. But when you go to the Ogden, the Weber County Sheriff's website there, they got the little button, ooh, tip a cop on drugs or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
And who really fucking cares about marijuana anyways?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, honestly.
Exactly. I mean, exactly. So there's an issue of priority. So even if some listener out there thinks they should be doing this against some meth dealer, exactly, there's a marijuana issue. But lastly, I mean, and here's where I guess I'm going to be most sort of flagrantly radical. But, like, I believe Matthew when he says that he didn't know that they were cops and he thought he was being invaded by intruders and had to defend himself. But I would argue that if he did know, indeed, that it was the Weber Morgan Narcotics Strike Force, he had even more justification to defend himself, because we know that he was aware of the 2010 case in Roy of Todd Blair, who had his home invaded, not just by the same Weber Morgan Narcotics Strike Force, but in many cases the same exact officers. Mm-hmm. And Matthew had seen the video where within the first 7 seconds of these officers being in Todd Blair's home, he comes down his hallway from his bedroom like in his underwear or whatever. He's got a golf club in his hand and they shoot him dead just like that. He's done. And so I believe Matthew that he didn't know that they were cops. But if he did know that they were cops, from me, he had even more reason to fire and protect himself.
Honestly, I'm right there with you. I don't know much about the case, but fuck it. If people are coming in your homes with guns, what the fuck are you supposed to do?
Right.
Like honestly, it's not like he was on a terrorist watch list like Jordan, So, but no, you know what I mean? Like,
right. Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know.
No, it doesn't make any sense. And then the other case that I mentioned, the Danielle Willard case, that one's much newer. That was on November 2nd of just last month, so about 1 month ago. I guess today's the 1 month anniversary. We don't know the details. We haven't even gotten the whitewashed police version of what has happened yet. But during this entire month, they've said basically nothing publicly and barely more even to her family members about why she was killed, why she died. They haven't made any allegations. They haven't even tried to come up with some lie to say she was holding a flashlight that looked like a gun, which, they've done.
All I've heard in that case is that they're refusing to give information.
And
right.
They're not even giving a basic, summary like they usually do, right?
Yeah, like the basic, police report, basic.
Right.
Like, all I've ever heard about that situation was
right.
just, we're not going to tell you anything.
Right. They haven't said anything.
It's a clear indicator that something bad fucking happened.
Well, exactly. Yeah, because,
Something
once something bad has happened, the main motivation that the police bureaucracy has is to try to ensure that an eventual settlement is as small as possible. Mm-hmm. So they're going to try to get the story as sanitized as possible so that the victims, the secondary victims, the survivors, have less leverage in trying to get some sort of settlement. So that's the game that's being played right now is, let's get everything perfectly whitewashed before we say a dang thing. But it's clear that they're at fault. And the family is likely to push for criminal charges against these police officers.
Which they should.
Of course they should. And that hasn't happened, and I don't even know how long, where an issue of police brutality actually led to criminal charges against the police officer.
Well, I mean, especially in this state.
Right.
I mean, how much... It's so ridiculous in this state.
It happens other places sometimes.
Yeah. It blows my mind how whitewashed people are about authority in general.
Right.
But I think it's a bigger epidemic of just the war on drugs in general and the authoritative police state that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do drugs. I'm straight edge. I've never done drugs. I would never do drugs. But fuck, if you want to do drugs, that's your own goddamn business. Like, why should I care?
Right.
It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever, especially when you take like a drug like marijuana, where 80% of the population agrees that at one point in their life they've tried it.
Mm-hmm.
Why should that be against the law? Like,
Right.
it just makes no sense to me.
Well, and some people say, well, you know, okay, if you don't like the law, change it. And there's a few responses to that. One is most people agree the government's corrupt in fact, and it's not so easy to just change laws you don't like. A majority of people don't like marijuana prohibition. It's still there. The second point is that even if the law doesn't change, police are given a very special and powerful privilege, which is called discretion, which means everyone recognizes that police can't enforce every single law that's out there. There are far too many, and there are far too many people breaking those laws.
Yeah.
And so they have to prioritize, they have to triage, they have to use their discretion. So my argument is, even if the law is still on the books, they don't enforce the sodomy law anymore, even though that's still on the books. They're using their discretion to say, okay, well, you know, it's basically unconstitutional, let's not enforce that. I would argue they should be doing the same thing with marijuana, saying, okay, well, technically it's still legal, but a majority of Americans don't even think it should be, so let's really deprioritize.
And isn't that what they did in Colorado?
Well,
Before it was actually legal?
Right. This has happened in a lot of places where you can have a law passed that makes marijuana or whatever you want the lowest enforcement priority.
Yeah.
So there's some problems with that though, because police basically operate like unaccountable gangs. It's very hard even for like a mayor of a city to keep them in line, but it does help considerably. It also tends to benefit people who are already otherwise privileged in society and doesn't help so much people who are racial minorities or poor people. They're the ones who end up still taking it in the teeth. But, you know, for whoever that benefits, yeah, I mean, lowest enforcement.
Well, and the prime example of that is the stop and frisk policy in New York that they do.
Right.
The biggest people who are disenfranchised by that are people of color and minorities.
Almost exclusively.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't do that to white people.
Regardless, like my little sister lived in Harlem for 3 or 4 years. Knew lots of people that it happened to.
Right.
Never happened to her once.
Right.
She's white.
Of course
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and they're certainly not doing this down on Wall Street, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
can you imagine?
You would find more there.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd find plenty. I mean, that's the thing. You know, if you've ever seen, what is it called? Inside Job, there's a whole section of it about substance abuse amongst Wall Street workers. And yeah, I'm sure they'd find baggies of cocaine all day long if they'd stop and frisk down at Wall Street. I'm not suggesting you do that in Wikipedia. Well, I don't know, maybe you should.
Maybe.
Do whatever.
Do some whatever, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, I just with blows me away about like the marijuana laws. Everyone's like, oh well, hemp be legal now, but I don't think a lot of people realize hemp became illegal because of the cotton industry, not because of the drug trade. You know, that was the cotton industry saying we don't want this competition. And do you think that's going to change?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's probably changed under state law in Colorado just by proxy. But, you know, I come from North Dakota, and North Dakota was, the farmers up there were the ones who pushed it the furthest within the system of any state. And they went to they either got rejected by the Supreme Court or the case was actually heard by the Supreme Court. But it got to that level, and ultimately the Supreme Court ruled that the government did have a legitimate interest in banning hemp. Because it's the whole idea, the camouflage idea. Oh, well,
Because
if
you
we
can't
allow
tell the difference between the two.
Right, I guess. I don't know, from 5,000 feet maybe you can, but I mean, you know.
But you can import it, right?
You can import it,
It
right.
just can't be grown.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that one guy, the guy who's got the crazy soap bottles, Dr. Bronner, he locked himself in a cage outside the White House like a couple months ago because I guess he's the #1 importer of hemp in the country.
Yeah.
And so he's done this before, and it's awesome. I think it's great that he's engaging in that sort of action. I would just like to see all those farmers from North Dakota who went to the Supreme Court and got squashed, saying like, well, we're not going to give up. Like, we still know it's right, and being out there in cages with Dr. Bronner.
Yeah, what are they going to start doing if you really started growing it? Because, I don't know the statutes that it's illegal. Is growing hemp illegal under the drug statutes? Or is it,
yeah.
So growing hemp is the same as growing marijuana?
I think so. I mean, I don't think it's like
I don't know.
exactly the same code, but the penalties are going to be similar, yeah.
I wish there was farmers that would just fucking do it.
Yeah.
Openly do it, not like
No,
secretly
you're right.
do it. It would just be amazing.
I think it'd be great, and maybe with the latitude that we're seeing now in Colorado, this new law might be just enough sort of flexibility for some farmers to do that, because Eastern Colorado is still the Great Plains. It's a perfect place for
think that the state would want it. Like how much more money they're bringing into the state, it would revitalize the lands that they're doing. It'd bring lots of commerce. It'd be fantastic.
Right, that's a perfect arena to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. It'd be a perfect arena.
If the Fed started busting down doors for hemp in Colorado, then that's just...
Well, and the citizens already there said they want marijuana legal for recreational use, so I don't know how they would get away with, busting down doors for growing a hemp plant.
Yeah.
What's also really interesting about this is Colorado is Utah's #1 sort of ski destination competitor.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, if you were some folks from basically anywhere and you could go to the state and ski where weed is just straight up legal, and after you get off the slopes you can go buy a joint and enjoy it in the hot tub, or you can go to Utah where it's hard to even get to the liquor store before you close.
Exactly.
Which one are you going to pick?
Yeah.
Drink your 3.2 beer.
Right, exactly. So I think that this, I don't know. It seems like Utah's, problem with substances is impervious to reason and logic and whatever. So maybe this won't have any impact here, but it's still great.
No, I'll just say it. The LDS Church is the reason why. They hold way too much influence over the legislature here, still to this day.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm always blown away when you hear people say, well, because where was it? They were debating on whether or not to allow a store in Provo to sell beer on Sunday, because in the statute there it was unclear. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I need to consult with the church before I make this vote. This is a fucking elected official.
Yeah.
Like, you need to consult with a church before you make a vote?
Yeah.
It just blows me away that people allow these elected officials to do this.
Yeah.
I wonder, though. On the one hand, I completely agree, but it's mostly because I disagree with them. If I heard some politician say, I need to go meditate on it, I'm a Buddhist and I need to go practice my faith a little bit and ruminate on this, I wouldn't have a problem with that. So,
I wouldn't have a problem if he's like, I'm going to pray about it.
Uh-huh.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, fair enough.
But I'm going to go consult what the church's policy on this is. I have a problem with whether you're Buddhist, Christian, like... To me, that completely separates the church and the state. Like, that's...
Sure.
If you want to pray about it, fine. You'll get your own little special feeling, and you're going to do what you want to do anyways, because it's all fucking fake. But, yeah, I don't know.
No, I agree.
Yeah. Anyways, going on a little rant there.
Yeah.
But, so the tar sands.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand it. Okay? Like, I come from the point of, I'm not really an environmentalist.
Right.
I've taken apart in some tree sits, and
Sure.
I'm vegan, and blah, blah, blah.
That's pretty environmentalist.
Exactly. you know what I mean? But, like...
I've only been in the trees a couple times,
But I look at most environmentalists, and I can't take them seriously for a whole bunch of different reasons. Most of the reasons, the veganism aspect. To me, if someone's an environmentalist, they're not vegan.
Right.
I just can't take them seriously.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to be an environmentalist, I think you have to be vegan.
Sure.
So explain to me why I should give a fuck.
Sure.
Because as of right now, I honestly am apathetic towards it.
Sure.
Not saying it's a good thing, not saying it's a bad thing.
Right. Well, the first issue, there's two that are really big. One is a little more parochial, but one is that, there are vast swaths of, especially if you're going to come at it from animal rights as a huge value, huge swaths of untouched wildlife habitat right now. In Utah, in the Book Cliffs, where they're proposing a tar sands project, this is the sort of area where you don't just see elk, you see gangs of elk. When have you ever seen, herds of deer crossing the highway instead of a deer? This is really remote, not very often traveled land that is hugely important to big animal herd populations. So when we talk about tar sands, this isn't like underground coal mining like we have in Utah, where if you didn't know better, you wouldn't even know what's going on because it's inside the mountain and from the road it looks beautiful and all this. No, this is strip mining. This is everything off the surface. So complete clear cutting of all the plant life. And then in this case, we're talking about the East Tavaputs Plateau and Main Canyon, where even the curvature, the very topography of this thing is going to be completely removed and destroyed. And then you have ancillary effects like the traffic from both workers and work trucks and whatnot. I mean, this is the end of the Book Cliffs wildlife habitat as we know it if this goes through in Utah. And this is the U.S. Oil Sands Project, which is the first and furthest along tar sands project within the United States. It's not the first in North America, of course, because there's a very huge and devastatingly awful tar sands project in northern Alberta, which has replaced huge boreal forests, again, with animal habitat issues at play there, of course. And then on top of it, so, of course, there's also climate change, which affects every living thing, not just animals, but human animals and plants as well. And in the way that I see tar sands, because some people say, oh, well, you know, if we just cut down car emissions by 30%, that would have a bigger impact than stopping tar sands. And, you know, you can play with the numbers a million different ways, and I'm sure you could come up with these things. But what's so...
I would just argue that point. Just go vegan.
Well, sure. Absolutely. I agree. And that's what I'm saying. You can come up with a lot of examples like that. And so why get so worked up about tar sands instead of, you know, making sure everybody goes vegan? Okay, here's my explanation, is that... we have, even George W. Bush, remember when he said, we're addicted to oil. I mean, it's more than just oil, we're addicted to fossil fuels. And I think addiction and the metaphor of addiction is a really apt one. I think as a population and as a culture, it is very much like individual substance abuse. And the way that I see tar sands, because it is dirtier and contributes to climate change more at the point of production, at the point of processing, and at the point of actual usage than any other fossil fuel. That's why people call it the dirtiest fossil fuel on the planet. The fact that we're doing all of these things, even as we see the carbon parts per million go off the charts, even as we see the mass extinction events speeding up, even as we see climate change right in front of us, we're engaging in almost astoundingly even more dangerous behavior in tar sands. And I think that if you've had friends or loved ones in your life who are dealing with substance abuse, you probably will relate to this, where you see people often for years and they just sort of like plateau. That, yeah, they have dangerous behaviors and yeah, they're poisoning themselves, but they haven't lost their jobs, they haven't really lost friends yet, and yeah, maybe they drive unsafely and whatever, but then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the plateau is over and they're doing things that are like crazy, and then you really start to worry about them dying, either from poisoning themselves to death or car accidents or whatever. And I think that this is what tar sands represents to me, on the sort of population level, is this complete escalation of dangerous behavior.
So what's the economic drive for the tar sands?
Is
it the whole idea of being, you know, oil independent and...
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because that's actually hilarious. The United States, in large part because of North Dakota, and what's called the Bakken oil shelf or Bakken oil field. Last year, in 2011, when all the numbers were said and done, the United States was an oil export nation. We produced more oil than we consumed.
Well, I mean...
So we always import and export, but it's just how does it flesh out? We are independent. We have more oil. That our empire is not independent. When you look at, say, you know, we need to get Middle East oil for Japan and that sort of thing. The empire is not independent, but if you just look at it from the United States, we're already energy independent.
Well, and I know what a lot of people don't understand is that oil is a global commodity, which means that the price is set on a global level.
Right.
It doesn't matter where you're importing it from.
That's
the price is set no matter what. You can produce all the oil you want in your own country, and that price is going to be the same whether you import it or not.
With one exception. So what's going on right now is, think of it, imagine in your head the lower United 48 states. So there's a place in Oklahoma called Cushing, Oklahoma, and this is where all of these pipelines from all across the country meet in this big intersection. So the Keystone XL pipeline, the southern leg, which has been approved and is currently under construction, goes from Cushing, Oklahoma to the Gulf Coast. So when they do that, this huge pool of oil that's being stored there right now in gigantic tanks can join that global market that you're talking about, and that's why they need this pipeline, without which it's just sitting there and, they'd have to sell it to Americans for a lower price because there's this glut of the product on the market. So in a sense, you're right, oil is a global commodity, but only if the oil can get to an export area.
Okay.
So right now, we have this huge, the Cushing is just flush with oil, including tar sands oil, and then the northern leg, which would go from Cushing, Oklahoma, all the way up to basically Alberta, would snake through the U.S., go all the way up to Alberta, represents another huge pool pool of oil. And the thing is TransCanada and Enbridge and all these other companies that are invested stand to lose billions if they can't get this product onto the global marketplace. And that doesn't just happen. It doesn't fly into the air. You either need pipelines or tankers or whatever it is. And so that's why you see people resisting in British Columbia and trying to stop any export of oil, and also coal and other things as well, but especially the tar sands oil from there. And that's why you see people in from the Lakota Nation to Nebraska farmers all the way down to Texas landowners and Oklahoma too as well, resisting this Keystone XL pipeline. Because when I said that it's the dirtiest and most dangerous fuel at every stage, these pipelines are not like oil pipelines. The Texas landowners who are getting really worked up about tar sands or about the Keystone XL pipeline have had oil pipelines on their land before and didn't think much of it. The difference between the two is tar sands need to be constantly heated, otherwise they turn to a solid. So now you have a completely heated pipeline. It needs to be held under much higher pressure. It's subject to a lot more leaks. Another leg of the Keystone pipeline, not the Keystone XL, but another leg of the Keystone pipeline, which goes through Michigan, was responsible for the biggest and most impactful inland oil spill in the United States, and that was 2011. We all remember the BP spill and whatnot. But tar sands was responsible for the second largest one, and we're not finished. I mean, tar sands is really just getting started. We have this thing up in Canada, and there's some 2 million acres of Utah, Wyoming, and Colorado that the EPA announced right after Obama's re-election that they were going to put up for bid. And so we're just
Obama made it clear that he was never going to stop the pipeline or this process anyways.
Well, he's been a little hedgy about it because back in January of 2012, he put on hold the northern leg of Keystone XL. So from Cushing to the Gulf Coast, he said, go ahead with that, but, let's hold off on this northern thing. But let's hold off. They're not ready for it anyway.
That's just a political game.
Well, exactly,
So,
because they don't have their permits, they don't have their easements and their rights of way and all that anyway. So saying the federal government was going to hold off accomplished nothing. So you're right. I mean, to a thinking and skeptical and critical observer, Obama's never done anything to give you any faith that he was going to help us out. But to people who are imbecilic, faithful liberals, there was hope. Oh, maybe Obama's kind of on our side. No, he's kicking you in the face and you don't even know it.
So is this an issue that can be won? Because every issue that I've been a part of that's like this, everyone that's involved in it is always gung-ho about it, and we can do this, we can do this, and we can do this. But then you step back and you really look at it and you're like, fuck, there's no way we can do this.
I think that it's always going to look like that until we actually do win. Say what you will about him, he has his problems, but Chris Hedges has seen a lot of revolutions in his life, and he always says, you never see it coming.
Which is true. It's like the day before, Soviet Union fell, no one thought it would happen.
That's
Which I understand that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, there's a lot of people down there. I mean, this is the right venue to talk about this. I mean, there's a lot of people down there who don't want to engage in tactics that they might find stylistically cool and actually really impactful and powerful that are non-strategic because it will alienate them from the mainstream and maybe other supporters and whatnot. But there's a lot of people involved in the movement who would like to see a lot more of, maybe you've heard of the Canna bomber who has blown up a pipeline on 8 occasions and is still at large.
I've actually not heard about him.
So there's a lot of people who...
Does he do that under the name of the ELF, or...?
No, he hasn't sort of taken any nom de guerre whatsoever.
Okay.
I don't even think... Well, it may not even be a he, right? I mean, let's be clear. It may well be a she or other. But I don't think this person has even taken the name Canna bomber. I think that's something the press has labeled them.
Okay, I'm actually surprised I'm not familiar with this, so I've never even heard of...
Right. So there's a lot of hope from people that say, holding on to this last flame, yeah, you're right. If people just continue to engage in exactly the same tactics and do things that feel safe and won't alienate you from anyone, that maybe it won't turn into anything. But one, you never see the revolution coming in. Two, who knows? I mean, maybe this is the case where people do get fed up enough. If all of a sudden someone, punctures a big hole in the pipeline, let's just put it that way at some point, maybe, the supporters all cheer and say, tango down, and they're real excited about it, rather than being like, oh, wait, that's violent, Who knows?
So is that an argument right now, is that doing something like puncturing a hole is a violent act?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think in all kinds of different circles.
I mean, I've never understood the argument of violent
Physical objects.
towards the laws, but then I've never understood the idea of pacifism. Like, I'm not a pacifist. I don't understand the idea of pacifism. To me, it's a very privileged standpoint to be able to take.
It is that.
So, which just blows my mind. How many people don't have the privilege to be a pacifist? You know? So I don't understand why those are being isolated. Is that the biggest argument? Because that's one of the driving forces that got me disenfranchised with activism, was those type of arguments. Is that still the biggest argument right now?
Absolutely.
I mean, to me, it's just fucking ridiculous.
I agree. I mean, I wish that we could get past it. I mean, I talk all the time about, I mean, when I was down in Texas with tar sands blockade, for example, this was a debate. I mean, a lot of people were talking about this, about how, you know, we're up against this police state and this multinational corporation that has multi-million-dollar equipment, and we're building tree houses, you know? Is this really going to work in the end?
Exactly.
And this is, it's an active debate. And, the biggest thing is that the people who argue for more militant, more destructive, more saboteur-like tactics are still, at least as of right now, or so it seems, with a few exceptions like this so-called cannon bomber and whatnot, but for the most part are still standing back and saying, okay, maybe y'all are right. Maybe if we did that, that would just completely alienate us, and it would be the end of tar sands blockade if people felt that, like, there was any sort of connection, which I don't know that they would have to. I'm just talking out of, all hypotheticals at this point. But there are definitely a lot of people who want to see this campaign or this moment or this time in history to be a turning point where people start seeing the violence, the inherent violence of the Keystone XL pipeline itself. And even if they do somehow perceive that some property damage is itself violent, which I don't agree with at all, but if they do see that, they can at least see, like, okay, well, this was a little bit of violence to prevent much greater violence. Okay, I'm still cool with it.
Yeah, well, my whole thing is that, like, in order to get something like this stopped, I see two main ways of doing it. Either the populace has to be voiced loud enough to make the government make it stop, so that you have a loud enough voice from the people, or it has to be not economically viable anymore. And to make it not economically viable, because I don't think enough people will make the government change their position, to make it not economically viable also seems unlikely, considering that they're talking billions of dollars, not just hundreds of thousands, or even millions, which is what happens in most economic saboteur situations. I mean, I think the biggest economic sabotage in the U.S. is $10 million. You know, that's almost pennies when you're talking this type of money.
Like Bell, Colorado.
Yeah, Bell, Colorado.
Yeah, I mean, I think a pipeline is a really interesting example, though, because it's really long, it's really vulnerable, and it would be hugely costly. I mean, so I think that you can rack that up. I mean, if you just look at, okay, so the tree houses that tar sands blockade has created, they've been cut around. So this clear cut that's about, I don't know, I guess about 75 feet wide through this, like, beautiful forest, has just, like, right up approach to their tree village, which is something like 8 or 9 pretty elaborate tree houses. They're awesome, and they have this 40-foot wall. It is really inspiring to see, and it's just, you know, it sort of, like, brings out that, like, childhood, like, cool, like,
No, tree sets are fucking amazing.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, they're awesome.
So it's, like, cool on all different levels, and so I guess the point I was making, though, is that, like, there was for a while cops on 24/7 watch on that treehouse, and I think that there's been, like, some sloughing off of that, because I think the cops realize, like, okay, they're not going to come down just because we watch them 24/7, and so I think there's been some.
Well, and there's historical evidence in the United States that tree sits can last for years and years and years. You know, like one of the ones I was part of was in Willamette National Forest, which I believe lasted for almost 5 years. I mean, they can go on for almost indefinitely if they need to.
Have they been arresting the runner, like people who are...
The support crews?
Constantly, yeah. I mean, that's been the big battle. So when I was down there for, what was it, October 15, that was, basically we got 60 people together, 45 or 50 of whom were basically just distractors, because this is when the cops were still, like, really, they were really on it. So we were just, trying to raise hell through the clear cut and trying to distract all of them to resupply the trees. And that day it was not successful. However, I think that they saw that, so they had, right before October 15th, they had for the first time charged someone with a felony for these sorts of activities. And I think what they saw is they charged someone with a felony and 50 people came to replace her. instead of, people like getting intimidated.
Yeah.
And so the felonies kind of disappeared, and I don't have too much direct contact with people at Tar Sands Blockade anymore, but I know that the trees are being resupplied, and so it seems to me that the cops are not there as
where
bad
the
as
tree
they
state
were.
is there, is it on national park land?
No, it's actually on a private landowner's land. That's been one of the big issues with Keystone XL in TransCanada, who's building the pipeline, is a lot of people have said that TransCanada has really misused and abused its eminent domain privileges.
Is that
it's
how
been
they
given
pretty
by
much pushed everything through?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they would approach landowners and they'd give them this really paltry payout, which was way worse than the oil companies ever would have in the past. So these people know what a good pipeline payout should look like, and they were offered a pittance. And then TransCanada basically said, well, if you won't take this, we're just going to get it in eminent domain anyway. So some landowners did take the money and then nevertheless have protested, and others just straight up out of principle refused. Well, they lost their land anyway.
Then they just lost it.
Yeah. And TransCanada was right. That's exactly what they did. So that's been, that has really stirred the don't mess with Texas, hands off, sort of libertarian spirit, which right now, Tar Sands Blockade, it's so interesting sociologically or like anthropologically, because it more than anything, my impression is that it is an alliance between largely conservative and libertarian Texas landowners and anarchist eco anarchists. I mean, it's like those two groups more than anything, and then you got a few liberals in there, and you got a few people to sort of round it out. But it's that alliance, and the alliance is so strong in the care and compassion that each side has for each other is so great. Like, it really is beautiful. And
well, I've always thought that anarchists get along better with far libertarians and far right wing conservatives a lot more, because I think it's more fitting. Anarchists are pretty much no government, and they're limited government. It's pretty easy to get there.
Yeah.
I can sit down with somebody who's really conservative, as long as they're not religiously conservative, and pretty much convince them, you're pretty much an anarchist. You just don't believe society is ready for it yet.
Right.
And so I totally get that aspect of it. But coming from my point, I'm not a primitivist. So I'm not opposed to using natural resources. I'm not opposed to technology. So I still am not 100% convinced why I should be opposed against this type of,
Well, is that your kid?
Yeah.
You have a kid?
Yeah, I have a kid.
I mean, do you believe that there's a mass extinction event underway right now that's being observed? Not just observable, but is being measured and observed?
I believe that if it does happen, then we're all dead, and who fucking cares?
No, my question was a little different. Do you agree that there is a mass extinction event that's not just observable and measurable, but has been observed and has been measured and is definitely happening?
I don't believe that global warming is on the level of mass extinction event, no.
Okay.
Do I believe it's happening? Yes.
Okay,
but I don't believe it's on a level of mass extinction event.
Well, then we're having a factual dispute, in which case I'll just send you some things, because, I mean, we're all entitled to our own opinions, but we're not entitled to our own facts.
No, I completely agree.
And I would submit to you that I think, at least the way I read the science, the way I read it, there's really no room for debate, that there is the most swift and profound mass extinction event that we can even conceive of underway right now. Okay. It's not in the future. It's not coming. It's started. It's already here. And
so if it already is here, then is anything we really going to do to stop it, or are we just trying to slow it down?
I think that you mitigate it at this point. Yeah, I mean, as many problems as I have with Bill McKibben, he wrote this book called Earth. It's got a few extra A's or something, and his whole point is that you can never go home again. Climate changed.
Yeah.
It's not it already changed, and we're never going to go back to the way it was before. But that doesn't mean that we need to sort of spiral all of these natural cycles to such an incredible velocity that it's unlike anything we've ever known before, and we're not even sure that life, much especially human life, is going to survive it. And it's possible that if we did slow things down considerably, that it is still going to be changed, and it is probably going to be really terrible. Floods are going to be the biggest thing that I think is going to destroy people's lives, and but we can hopefully reduce the human suffering that is inevitable already.
So, and then I also have to look at, okay, well, if these things do happen, aren't those the type of events that could actually cause society to turn around and say the government did fail us and actually cause the revolutions?
It's possible. I mean, absolutely. But I think that, I hold out hope that it doesn't need to be a disaster of Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Sandy caliber that forces the revolution. I mean, what ultimately sparked the fall of the Soviet Union was one small dock worker starting a labor strike. I mean, other revolutions are started by college tuition going up just that little bit too far, or mass transit fares going up too far. So the idea that, disasters will be good for the revolution, while it may be true, to me it's a little bit cold.
And maybe it's just I am so pessimistic about the idea of society changing.
I'm not at all.
And maybe that's what it is. Because, like I said, I'm not like, I totally believe in global warming. I don't believe it's a natural thing. I totally believe it's man-made. But I also like my computer at the same time. But I do a lot of things, a lot of steps that I think most people don't do. But like I said, I don't consider myself a huge environmentalist either. Because I don't, go that... I don't go to, like the tar sands rallies or anything anymore. And maybe that's because my definition's you have to be a lot more radical to hit my definition. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And like I said, I look at all these issues that arise, and it's just like it almost seems too overwhelming. And like you look at like Jordan's case and what's happening to him. You look at like the grand jury, resistance that's happening across the U.S. You look at like all these different things, and really, is society ready to change?
I mean, I hate to repeat myself, but I think that cultural revolution isn't so much different than the political revolution.
I think they're one and the same, yeah.
Yeah, probably. And I think that, so I have this metaphor, because often the reason that people fall out, I mean, I think what you're expressing is what I call that it's not working feeling. Like, I feel like people believe, whether they've really thought it all the way through or not, but people are often harboring these thoughts of a heroic revolution, that if we organize just right, we talk about the right things and engage in just the right tactics and have just the right outreach and messaging, then we can bring about the revolution and things will be awesome. I actually don't believe that at all. I don't believe in any heroes. I think that's a very sort of like, the same way we learn about history and you learn about George Washington, but not what his housekeeper was doing.
Exactly.
I think that that's why we believe the revolution could be brought about heroically. I'm more of then the other side is the magical revolution, which is people are all like, things are going to have to get so much worse. Maybe there's a hurricane that'll come, or, who knows? There's nothing we can do to contribute, so we just, sort of fold our hands.
Like we say, I believe it's somewhere in the middle of that. Like, I'm a strong proponent of it. It needs to be a people's revolution. It has to be the people upright. You can't force people to revolt. Like, that just never will work.
Right. So I don't have a label for what I think it is, but I think it's basically an opportunity. Opportunities are coming all the time, and as the dominant system sort of fumbles, and what you're seeing right now, like in New York with Occupy Sandy, is it's taken 3 weeks for people to get their energy on. After another, it may or may not even be a disaster, but we may have extended swaths where people are cut off of the grid, whether they like it or not, for months. And some of these might be, for example, indigenous communities that are already sort of set up and ready to be like, okay, you know what, we're not even getting that shit anymore, we're totally sovereign, like you see in Chiapas in Mexico, where people are like, fuck you, we're not a part of Mexico.
I like that you brought up the Occupy Sandy. One of my favorite pictures that I've seen of that is the Occupy Sandy people actually feeding FEMA workers because they don't even have enough. Like, they can't even take care of themselves. Right. It's fucking awesome. It's awe-inspiring, actually. Like when I see those things.
So my thought is like, okay, so we have to deal with this it's not working feeling, because a lot of people come in, they get excited, and then they feel like, oh, it's not working, and they go home, and they go home and they stay depressed. So I think the metaphor that I say is that organizers and revolutionaries and politicos of all different stripes, I see us as surfers, and the revolution is like some huge tsunami-like wave that we have to surf in, just like, that endless summer sort of championship ride. But what do you do while you're waiting for that tsunami wave that you might only get an opportunity to ride once in your life? Do you just sit on the beach and bemoan that there's no tsunami for you to practice on? Or do you practice on the little waves every single day? And I think that it's the latter. And I think that, for example, a really great one is like Trayvon Martin. Like, that wasn't constructed. That came out of nowhere.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's another reason that revolutions often come, is an incidence of police brutality. Huge, widespread riots and whatnot happen all over the world because one kid got shot, unmercifully and unjustifiably. And so I think that, you look at every single one of these and you get your community as ready as it can be, and you basically, I think of it as gardening. Your community is soil, and you're trying to get the soil ready for when that revolutionary seed is ready. You've got a great place for it to grow.
I like your metaphor, but like what happened, especially with me, and I don't know, maybe with Jordan also to some extent, is that like while you're out there getting ready to practice on those little waves, it's all those other little fucks out there that are trying to knock you down.
Like
it's
who?
It's all the other activists that aren't really activists, or the ones that are trying to hold you down, or the ones that aren't moving things forward, or the ones that are, like you get into those petty arguments, like we were talking about before, of, well, what is violence? What is this? And then there's the seclusions because you don't believe that because you believe that breaking a window is okay, and so all of a sudden you're excluded because of that. You know what I mean? That's what gets me really down. That's what personally got me down.
There's definitely always cliques within activist circles, and that kind of sucks. But I mean, yeah, like I think you just kind of have to.
So how do you get around that?
I mean, I'm not a good example because I was the kind of person that got depressed and sat on the beach.
No, I'm totally right there with you. Especially like. Maybe you have similar feelings with me, all of a sudden, you get arrested, you have all these charges against you, you find out somebody that's really close to you is talking to the FBI, and then everyone else you thought was your friends, all of a sudden are not there anymore, and they're supporting this other person, being like, well, you don't understand why he's talking, you don't understand what's really going on, and you're like, fuck you!
Like that was exactly similar to my situation.
Yeah, exactly similar to your situation.
My situation, pretty similar.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you find people who, who do understand what's going on, and you just work through it. Like there's definitely like it sucks because you can become extremely bitter, extremely jaded, especially when you are like in my circumstance right now. I'm on probation. I have to decline things all the time, and it just makes me just like, but it fuels me as well. Like it makes me that much more passionate once this is all over to do things again. I don't know.
I mean, one thing that I would say is I think that the conversations you're talking about, you referred to them once as petty. I don't think they're petty at all. I mean, we just went over about how, political revolution and social revolution are one and the same. And so I think convincing your more, conventional or traditional, civil disobedience style comrades that property destruction is often not violent, and having those conversations are really important. And I think,
or even having the conversation, it might be violent, but that's okay.
Sure.
I'll go that far. I'm not one to ever take a tactic off the table, whether or not I necessarily agree with that tactic should be used. I don't feel that I have the authority to say to someone else, you shouldn't use that tactic. It just might not be right for me.
Sure. Well, whatever the conversation is, I mean, I think it's wrong to think that you're going to go into your political circle and find refuge. I think that that's where some of your most important and most difficult work is done. And if I had any sort of like ask, it would be for people who are really, really aware. And maybe, they had this from like a really young age. I didn't. My sort of like awareness and my sort of like emerging from Plato's cave or whatever was very, very slow and very incremental. And so if I had one ask of anything is that people try to embody, radical patience. I mean, I had a really interesting conversation with a guy from Denver while I was in Texas, and we were talking about our relative anarchist communities and our sort of relationship to them, both in them and outside of them, and their relationship to other segments of the activist community. And what we both shared is that our anarchist communities, the biggest, problem or flaw that we see is impatience. It's like this idea that not that anything that they say is wrong. I share their politics and their philosophy, but it's just, one of my very dear friends said about the Occupy movement was that he had to leave because he, this is a quote, got tired of educating liberals. And I understand that. I get it. I get tired of educating liberals too. I know the feeling, but I think that thinking that that's like extra or something that in a better world wouldn't exist so that we could all join together and fight the monster, I don't think that's the way it works. Like, I think that is fighting the monster. That's fighting the cultural baggage that everyone was born with. So don't think of this as like, oh, this is just a stumbling block before we get to the real stuff. That is the real stuff.
Well, and it's like, I can't remember who said this. I think it was Bakunin. I could be wrong, and I'm paraphrasing. But it was basically, you need to realize where society is for a revolution. There's basically three stages. There's stage where you pretty much can't do anything. There's a stage where you can educate, and then there's a stage for the revolution.
I was going to bring that up. Yeah.
You know, and it's all about where those stages, where you are, and recognizing where you are. And I think you're right. I think too many people want that revolution. I don't really want a revolution. I don't want to have to take up arms. I don't want to have to, you know.
May not be an armed
You're
revolution.
right. I would definitely hate a violent revolution. Would I be a part of it if it happened? Fuck yeah, I don't care. I've always said that. I'll never deny that. I would fight for the people for my dying day, but I don't necessarily want that. Do you know what I mean?
I would love for it to be a
many
peaceful
people
revolution.
Exactly, but
a violent revolution.
but I think it's funny that you're saying that he was tired of educating liberals. And I remember when the Occupy movement first happened, it was one of those things that I felt like it was right up my path, and I never got involved. And when it first happened, I first heard about it, and I heard about the organizing of it and getting rid of it, I'm like, it will fail. And I was that pessimistic kid that never showed up, never helped, because I was like, well, I've been around these type of people, I know how they organize, it's not going to work.
Right.
And then I was the dick who never showed up and actually tried to help, you know.
Right. and on one level, I feel like that's okay, because I feel like the people who are like that are legion, and I think that a lot of y'all have probably fairly well-working barometers, and obviously you were right. I mean, had somebody asked me, like, is this the revolution? You know, I would have put on my game face and said, yes, this is a revolution. But in my head, I knew, you know, this is practice. And I think that, you know, yeah, I mean, you're gonna sense when the real thing has come, and so, like, I'm comfortable with that. I mean, I really do want people to be more patient, and I want people to whoever it was who said that in those 3 stages, I think we're definitely in the middle stage where education is really possible and really necessary. And so for people who do have a far more, I'll just say, far more enlightened view, we're willing to share and talk about that constantly and do so publicly and shamelessly. Please do. And this podcast is one of those things.
So,
I think it's great. It's a contribution.
Yeah.
Just to be, are you an anarchist?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of hesitated on that a little bit.
I mean, the reason I say that is because the word anarchist means different things to different people.
Well,
so I try to predict who's listening.
There's so much.
So
Yeah,
to the people who are listening, when you say, "Are you an anarchist?" Yes,
Okay.
but you know, if I'm on like some sort of mainstream radio station and someone just asks that without any sort of context, without any sort of explanation, I'm gonna say no.
See, that's what
And
I was leading to my next question. Okay, so why do us anarchists, you know, feel so ashamed of being anarchists?
Well,
Does that make sense? And not that I necessarily feel ashamed, but it's like you constantly feel you have to educate. You constantly
you have to explain.
You have to explain it. Like every time, and I don't shy away from saying I'm an anarchist anymore. I used to, but it always comes to the explanation. Always.
Right.
You know, well, this is what anarchism really means. This is the basis of it. All anarchists are different. It's basically saying, like, you know, I believe in democracy. Well, what does that really fucking mean?
Right.
You know. So what makes you feel like you have, like, I feel it too, but like, how can we get over that and get over the idea that, you know, this Red Scare that has been, you know, pushed on us since the 20s, how can we get through that?
I mean, on the one hand, I'm not sure we have to. I mean, I have this debate in my head where it's just like, I mean, to just sort of borrow phrases from the capitalist society, I mean, like, so anarchy as a brand is, like, in the dumpster, right? I mean, like, amongst those of us in the in crowd, it's great, and we love our little circle A's.
I will say, it is well more regarded now than it was 10 years ago.
Sure.
Being an anarchist 10 years ago was ridiculous. Like, being part of, like, the WTO in Seattle and being a part of, like, those early movements, it was way different regard. The Black Bloc as a tactic was more highly regarded than it is today, but anarchists in general weren't.
Right. And so to just borrow this concept of a brand, and I know that's really disrespectful and ugly, but let's just use it because it's useful. I wrestle with whether we need to really be out and open and talking about it all the time and reclaim the word anarchist and rebrand it essentially in the popular mind, or whether we have better things to do and there's a way that we can sort of maintain the same philosophy but not call it the same word, because that word maybe is probably not beyond resurrection. Everything can probably be reclaimed, but the question is how long is that going to take, and do we have that amount of time? I often, if I'm talking to a mainstream audience, usually people don't just ask me, "Are you an anarchist?" But but they may ask, and this happened one time, "What is your political philosophy?" And I said, "Well, I'm a small D Democrat." I believe in democracy at its root means power to the people. And so to me, both as an anarchist or as a small d Democrat, whatever it is, I tell people like left, right, whatever, my primary political value is small everything. Small city governments, small nation states, small unions, small businesses, small farmers co-ops, small everything. And institutions that are small enough that they are actually within the control of their members, people, which is essentially democracy, which is a variation of anarchist, right? And when you say it that way, people say, oh, and I'll even tell people if I'm trying to sound even more mainstream, I'll say, I believe in a United States of America that's very different than the one we have today, but it would be a union of maybe 1,500 or 2,000 states. And people say, oh, that sounds crazy. And it's like, well, it's not that crazy. How many school districts do we have right here in Salt Lake County? Oh, like 4 or 5. I would like to see each one of those, maybe even smaller than that, be an individual nation state. And if something so important as public education is being managed on that micro of a level, why not everything else in our lives? What be managed? There are a few things more important than public education, and we trust super micromanaged bureaucracies to handle that. So why not everything else also?
Because you think it hell for the multinational corporation.
Well, that's exactly that's why it would, and it would also, and here's where the eco protector, the environmentalist in me comes in. Is this would be hell on global trade. This would totally enforce people buying locally, producing locally.
Okay, but
sorts of things.
So you brought that up, but that's a whole other thing. But isn't buying locally, producing locally, and selling locally, isn't that in and of itself another privileged act?
Well, it is currently, but I don't think that it would be if it were the status quo.
So, how like when you go into sub-Saharan Africa, how are they able to produce locally without having where they can't even produce farms? They don't have enough water. They don't have the resources.
It's actually not true. I mean, the reason that there are people in these regions is because they were at one time able to produce food for themselves. Often, why they're not able to produce food for themselves right now is because the agricultural sector has been completely destroyed by food aid. Okay. And so you have all this free food dumped on the market, and if that happens 2-3 years in a row, well, the farmers that were there can't get any value for their products, so they ditch out, sell their land or whatever. They're not teaching their sons and daughters the same practice.
Yeah, I've never even thought about it that way.
Yeah. No, I mean, the famines, I mean, when you've heard it say it's a political issue, not an environmental issue, still to this day, it is one that I think we're turning that tide, and water scarcity is the biggest one. And I'll say it all the time, the Israel-Palestine issue is the most visible and least understood water war in the world. And so I think we're reaching a time where our environmental limits are going to be, people are going to need food because they can't produce enough locally, but we're not there yet.
I've never heard the Palestinian-Israeli conflict put in the terms of water before.
Right.
I've heard it in a million other different contexts. So you say that. So.
Sure. So the one of the biggest, I don't think it's the biggest, but I think it's probably a top 5 of the colonies that's in legally recognized Palestinian lands. The 1967 borders is called Ariel, and Ariel sits atop what other than the biggest aquifer in the region.
Okay.
And it's one of the earliest ones. And you have, and this is starting to be talked about now, so I saw a few news stories this summer where they would juxtapose Palestinians in Gaza being told there's water restrictions, so the water would only come on for a few hours during the day. Meanwhile, over in Tel Aviv, they were having their annual water festival where people are super soakering each other, and there's water balloons, and and so this people are starting to recognize, I think, what it's really about. But I mean, and also in the U.S., the ongoing and continuing genocide of Native American groups is also now largely based on water, and the Navajo or Diné reservation. Is a great example. I mean, both they and the Hopi and other groups in the area have been fighting to protect their water really, really powerfully in the last 2 or 3 years, and here they are, even partially in our state, using a lot of our same water. It's all the Colorado River Basin water, and yet our media doesn't cover this. I mean, hardly anyone knows about the water war that's going on right now in the Four Corners.
Yeah.
And so...
And I've only heard sporadic stories about it.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's...
Right. So Israel-Palestine isn't normally thought of as a water war, and people are not, I don't think, even though we live in the Colorado River Basin, people are not well aware. Well, here in Salt Lake, we're just over the Wasatch, so that's just outside of it, technically.
Yeah.
But, I mean, all of Utah east of the Wasatch is a part of this basin. And it's a gigantic ecological disaster in the making. I mean, some year there's going to be a drought, and people are going to say, "Oh, well, people are dying because of the drought." And it's like, no, this is a person-made. This is a manufactured disaster, where entire cities and colonies were created based on water resources that never could have been counted on. And that's the actual disaster, is this poor planning and land development. These people who make so much money off of developing land at cheap buck, and then, people are, there's huge water issues in our region coming. And that also goes back to tar sands, is because tar sands is not just hugely consumptive of water, it needs a ton of water in order to produce tar sands, but it also is hugely poisonous to what water it doesn't use. And this is in the Colorado River Basin area, where 18 million Southern Californians rely on the water that goes through Utah and eventually down there. All of Las Vegas, huge portions of Phoenix, as well as all sorts of indigenous groups that have relied on this water for eons, for as long as anybody knows. And so there's already this huge water scarcity issue in the system, and Utah is, and the nation, frankly, is proposing more and more fracking, which is both very water consumptive and poisonous to water. Also a nuclear reactor at Green River, which is also hugely water consumptive, and in many scenarios hugely poisonous to the water, and tar sands. All three of these things, this is what I was talking about how an addict who goes on for years and it's like, yeah, it looks bad, but you can't say very much because they still have their job and whatever. And then all of a sudden it gets like out of control. It's like fracking is already underway hugely in Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. That's true. But now they're talking about more tar sands, and they're talking about a nuclear reactor, again, in the Colorado River Basin. It's dangerous, and I care very much about the earth. I'm to some degree a voluntary extinctionist, but I mean, what I can't handle more than
I
anything
haven't
else
met
is human
anyone for
suffering.
years that said they were part of the climate movement. Like years, honestly. Like I almost thought I would die away.
Voluntary extinctionism?
Yeah.
No, I think that before we get to voluntary extinction, is I believe in a completely consensual downsizing of the population through widespread availability and empowerment of especially women to use birth control. I mean, we could cut the population completely consensually within 2 or 3 generations by huge portions, and do so in an organized fashion that doesn't create suffering. So way before we get to voluntary extinction, which I'm pretty much in favor of, we just need to create consensual population control.
I completely agree, even though I have produced one.
Well, at least you're not completely replacing the couple.
Exactly, yeah.
That's something.
One of the things that we do every week is we have a poll, which we probably should talk about.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance? Did you see the
Is
poll?
this the favorite anarchist?
The favorite anarchist poll. That
I
we
just thought it was hilarious to have a poll where you're voting on an anarchist. Honestly, that's why I did it.
I don't remember who is on the poll. I did see I remember Emma Goldman was on it.
And we had
Emma Goldman is actually not one of my favorite anarchists. Can I just say that?
Sure, why not?
Here, I'm opening up the poll results.
So
she'd be happy you have the freedom to say it.
that is probably
so
true.
this is
My
like
daughter actually has a Build-A-Bear named Emma Goldman. So
this was the largest vote that we had. We had 56 votes on it, and that's crazy. But looks like Mikhail Bakunin.
which I'll say he is my favorite by far. He's the one who really introduced me to anarchism. God in the State, I don't know if you guys have read it, and The Capitalist System are both works I think everyone should read. I actually give The Capitalist State to all of my employees. It's kind of funny.
Especially because you're the man.
So your list of anarchists, I mean, maybe this is something we can talk about. It's so booky.
It is.
What is it about the anarchist community where people are like so like citing their sources to these, I mean, rather than,
Speaking of that,
more...
And that's why I have
look at this.
Right.
Anarchist FAQ
That's
Volume
volume
2.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, look at this. It's all, that's what it is.
Where does that come from? Because I don't know.
AK Prep.
This is AK Press.
But do you mean like?
No, I'm not saying where does that book come from, but where does that... I mean, what is it within anarchist culture or anarchist motivations that leads people to be so bookish? And not just philosophical, but like referential about it. You know? I mean, what's wrong with
Jordan were
just...
talking about this today because he's like, I really don't know that much about anarchist history. I don't really fucking care.
I don't either.
Like,
I know like an 8th grade education would know about the history of the United States. I know the basics of the basics about anarchist history. But I do think it's important to know where we come from. I do think that's important.
Sure.
But like, I'll be honest, like, I didn't know the in and outs of the Haymarket massacre until probably a year ago. You know,
And
I've been familiar with it for 12, 13 years.
And that was a vote right there. The Haymarket.
Yeah, someone put in the Haymarket murders as
I
as their
asked,
favorite
I
anarchist.
asked that person, "Can you name them?"
Could you name them?
I can't name them.
Could you name any of them?
No. I'm terrible at arbitrary memories.
Yeah, I couldn't name any of them.
So, but
I'm better at ideas than some
Like
person's arbitrary
I
name.
know an anarchist bombed the Secretary of State. I couldn't tell you who that anarchist was.
Yeah.
You know, I know it happened. I know Emma Goldman stuck up for him, but I couldn't tell you anything else about it.
My view on it is this: I understand that a lot of the issues are similar, and they're still similar, but a lot of the issues are not similar anymore.
And that's probably the reason that I'm not a huge fan of Emma Goldman. Most of her work, I think, is very period. I don't know if you've read a lot of her work or not.
No. I don't read this stuff.
I
read
that's awesome.
zines.
That's awesome. Yeah.
You know, I read things my contemporaries are writing more than anything.
And I think that's what I do too. Like, I never got into anarchism through the history of anarchism. I know that you've done more. Friends of mine have done more, but me, I felt that there shouldn't be a hierarchy and just basic solid anarchist principles. I didn't need any anarchist history to feel this way. You know?
See, anarchist history, like learning about it, is what totally got me to be an anarchist, though. Like, I would never have called myself an anarchist before being exposed to it. I knew basically what most people know about anarchism until that point, and it was one of those things. It was like when, pretty much when indie media very first started, is when things were very first coming out. So the history is what got me involved personally.
Right. Which is great for those. I mean, it seems to be a concentration of people within this community that are inspired by that sort of thing, and which I feel like is actually very unusual. I mean, amongst...
It's a very nerdy thing, I guess.
Yeah, it is
you know,
and I love that we have our favorites too.
Well, I mean, I think everyone does.
Totally
Well, but you know, there's so many that I can't get into. Like you said, you don't read any of them. I can't read half of them. Like, I can't read Book Chin. I read Book Chin, I'm just fucking bored out of my mind.
Right.
You know.
Noam Chomsky's pretty dry as well.
Oh no!
Even
Have
though
you
he doesn't
listened to an
consider
interview
himself
of
an
Noam? Yeah,
anarchist.
he never said he was an anarchist.
He says he has anarchist views.
Yeah. Have you ever listened to an interview of Noam Chomsky? Have you ever listened to him speak?
Yeah, of course.
It's fucking dry as hell.
Yeah, I mean, I like Chomsky's speaking. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I like the ideas. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. Like, I have a lot of interest and respect for, and in tough times have been really helped out by Buddhist thought. And yet I can't read books about Buddhism. Like, I probably need to talk about it, you know? Like, I need a guru to go, like, to teach with and discuss with. And I feel like it's probably the same for me with anarchism, is like, just reading a book is so dry. I'm not getting it anyway. Like, I think I really need to discuss it and have a seminar style.
I feel the same way. And unfortunately, I get to the point where it's like, there's not that many people you can discuss it with. Like, the new book that came out, Accumulation of Freedom. I don't know if you
No, I don't know.
It was supposed to be all about anarchist economics and how you can build the economics in an anarchist society, basically. I was super excited for it to come out. Came out when Jordan was in prison. I bought 2 copies, one for me, one for him, so he could read it in prison, so we could talk about it. You know, I haven't finished it yet. It's to me, it's just like a rehash of anarchist history. Well, this is what this anarchist said about economics. Well, I fucking know what they said about it. I know what he said about mutualism. I think it's a dumb fucking idea. Like, I don't need to know that. I wanted something that would push my education forward.
I think something that's really dry about anarchist history to me is it always ends up being the history of self-identified anarchists, which is only a very small segment of people.
Well, that's another thing.
Who behaved like anarchists and sure, like Noam Chomsky, who sure seem like anarchists, even if they're not, you know, the lobbyists for anarchy. You know,
well, that's my other thing. Is like, whenever you read any news story about an anarchist, self-proclaimed anarchist, so and so.
Well, sure.
And it's like, why do you have to put self-proclaimed anarchist? Like, why do you have to put anarchist? Like, honestly, like, it's always.
Well, they do that because, look, they correctly have, correctly determined that anarchist is not divisive. What's the word? It's negative. It's an insult. I mean, you know, and it shouldn't be, and in certain circles it's certainly not.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same thing that sometimes they say, you know, they've gotten away from it a little bit, but, you know, the self-avowed homosexual or whatever, you know.
Self-avowed?
I mean, for years, anytime you would see a story about anybody gay, especially like in local media, like, you know, instead of saying, you know, I mean, they didn't have an elegant way of saying, like, we're not outing him, he outed himself.
He outed himself, yeah.
He's a self-avowed homo.
But I never understood why it even ever made news.
Well, I mean, like, for example, I mean, if you were a victim of a hate crime, that was...
Well, I understand
sort of
that,
thing,
but it's like, oh, such and such celebrity, they're homosexual. Why the fuck do I care?
Sure.
I've never understood. But then again, I've also come from the standpoint where I believe it just shouldn't matter what your sexual preferences are, no matter what they are.
Yeah.
No, even whether you identify as male, female, trans, whatever. I've never viewed it as an issue.
Sure.
But
What about otherkin? I was going to bring that up.
other
Someone who doesn't identify as a human. And I'm not joking at all. Like, this is actually...
I want to hear more about this. This is new to me.
This is
otherkin? That's what they call it?
It's called otherkin.
Okay, tell us about it.
To me, that borderlines on a mental disorder, sir.
Well, I mean, a lot of people feel that way, and so that's I don't know.
Isn't
But there are
being
people
part of
who've
the
been raised by
genome-
wolves legitimately. I mean, is it that sort of
Well,
idea,
and
or is it people who actually had that experience?
or is it
for
people that just
example-
wish that they were not part of the human genome?
Well, it could be like you might identify more as a cat or something like that.
That guy, though, you know,
And
the guy who transformed himself to be a cat?
Yeah.
He passed away a couple weeks ago.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Too bad.
But no, I mean it's something serious, and I think that like a lot of people say, well, that's stupid, and that's But when you really think about it, that's the same thing that people were saying like about transgenders and everything else. Well, that's not right. You were born a male, then you're a male.
Honestly, if someone wants to say they identify as a cat, why the fuck do I care?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think as
I mean, it's interesting,
but the other topic was that is that actually counterproductive to maybe the trans culture?
how would that be counterproductive with trans culture?
Like basically making if somebody wanted to say, well, I identify more as a toaster, like.
I think that's wrong. I think it'll be very productive. I mean, I think trans people maybe feel threatened by it because they're like, for example, on Facebook, I'm married to Main Canyon, which is one of the canyons that might be destroyed by tar sands. And some liberal, a person who I actually like quite a bit, wrote something about, like, they were insulted because it was like, oh, well, I want to marry my partner, and, they always say, like, oh, next you're going to have people marrying their dogs or whatever, and you're just making fun of that, or you're appearing to be making little of my battle for same-sex marriage. And so I think you'll see the trans community do the same thing. But, like, I think that it's always about shifting sort of norms. And so, like, if the most unusual thing on people's radar is people who are anatomically one gender but feel another and want to be recognized as the other, that's, like, the most radical thing they know. It's going to be very difficult for that community to succeed. But then all of a sudden, if you actually have an organized community who's like, we're not even humans, now all of a sudden the trans people are not the most radical thing on the scene, and that's going to help them.
No, I actually totally agree with that.
It's
And so...
But I kind of agree with that. I mean, because on one level I was thinking, like, okay, well, were they raised by wolves, or do they have some sort of anatomical thing? Is there anything beyond their feeling that sort of substantiates their I feel other than human? But I would not have that kind of standard for a trans person who has, completely typical genitalia of one gender and was, if they chose to be, could be completely cisgendered. If they nevertheless said, no, I'm transitioning, I'm going to be the other gender, I feel like that gender in my heart, I wouldn't require that they, have indeterminate genitalia or whatever. So, but I just wonder, is it anything more than
But what you're saying with that, though, I think it's pretty well proven that genitalia doesn't necessarily determine
oh, absolutely.
What you are. So that doesn't really matter. It's not like there's just X, Y, and X. There's so much. It's more even on a scientific level, it's way more complicated than that.
Right. I guess my point. A lot of people underestimate how many people are born with indeterminate genitalia and how big of a portion of the transgender community that is, and intersexuality especially. There's a lot of kids who are born with indeterminate genitalia, and until very, very, very recently, almost all of them would have all of that, whatever it looked like, chopped off, and then they'd cross their fingers and
hope we pick the right one.
Yeah, well, no, they would not hope they pick the right one, because they always pick a girl, because they just cut it all off and make some ersatz vagina, and then they cross their fingers and hope it turns out okay, which often it hasn't. Even Oprah has had these shows, right? But I wonder, I mean, okay, so gender is such a strong thing in our culture. I would understand why someone would feel like they're being boxed into one and that box doesn't feel comfortable. And I see the same thing. Obviously, humanity as a concept is pretty strong in our culture too. But I mean, these people who want to be identified as other than human, do they also behave as other than human? I mean,
I think in a lot of circumstances they might,
Yeah.
Even some people might go to the extent of changing themselves by body modification or other means. Not necessarily, though.
And just because I don't know anything about this, and you know everything about it, apparently.
I don't.
You are like
You're the expert in
You're the expert in this.
I actually recently just found about this. I have a friend who
this is beyond just sexualizing this, right? It's not like just a sexual fetish. This is like how they completely identify.
Yeah, they don't feel. I have a friend who identifies. They feel that they're more like a horse, and so this is what I.
But so just to be clear, like it's not like they're into horseplay, like in a sexual fetish. They.
No, definitely not.
Honestly, feel like
they just always associated and felt that they were more aligned with a horse or something.
Does that come out of the fetish?
I don't think that they have any sexual fetish, to be honest. Like, I don't think there's any
Everyone
fetish.
has a sexual fetish.
Well, I don't.
No,
I don't agree with that either, I know.
Yeah, but I mean, I
wish it was true.
There's no fetishism involved in this.
Okay.
I think it's strictly just how they feel about themselves.
Huh.
So how does that manifest itself, though? I mean, if everyone were respecting this person's wishes, that they identify as a horse, I mean, they want to be here's my friend, my horse friend, so-and-so. Because I understand, that's what I'm saying about
and
gender.
They want to be treated as domesticated or wild.
See, and these are things that I don't know. Like,
okay,
I think,
fair enough.
like, I just, like I said, I just recently found out about this when my friend talked to me about it, and I'm being understanding because...
I knew nothing of this until you brought it up.
Yeah, and I didn't either. And apparently a lot of people within the vegan community and the trans community often attack other kin, as they're referred to. I think sometimes they go by other things like meta-human or other terms as well. But I know very little about this, but thought it was interesting.
Well, it seems fine to me. I mean, it doesn't seem to put any extra burden on me to...
No, definitely not.
I mean, but I need to know more about it. I mean, it's confusing to me, though, because I understand, I mean, gender is so present, it's even in pronouns, right? I mean, that's where it comes up a lot. And so at a lot of radical meetings you hear, my name is Jesse and I prefer male pronouns or whatever. And so that's why it makes sense to me that someone would feel very compelled to either choose or... I'm using insensitive words, but make a big deal of the fact that they're not choosing and they're, in between or whatever. That I get because gender's so present. I guess it's just sort of a mindfuck for me to think, well, yeah, I mean, I guess on some level humanity is also very present, but I mean, I also get someone who didn't feel like they are the gender that they were ascribed at birth and want to behave and be perceived as the other, but I don't know what that looks like for a human. I mean, do they go run around the pastures with the horses? Or, I mean, is it I guess what I'm saying is does it manifest itself in a visible way in the lives of the people around this person, or is it sort of a symbolic gesture? And there's nothing wrong with it being a symbolic gesture. I'm just wondering, what does it look like behaviorally? What does other kin look like?
As far as I could tell, there's no difference in like the actual physical, but I don't know.
But they're not asking the people around them to refer to them differently. They're not
asking like to be groomed or anything else. But like
I'm sorry, other kin that I laughed at.
I'm not being insensitive. I'm just
I'm insensitive that I laughed, but it is funny.
But that's just like what I'm saying. Like I think they just identify that way.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Well,
and if anybody chooses to identify anyway,
I've always lived each to their own. I'm not here to judge. I don't care. Like,
I just laugh because I don't understand. I'm sure if I understood better, I'd be more sensitive. But I'm admitting total ignorance on this one.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I have totally same here.
And I think another thing to it is, and this is where it weirds a lot of people out, and like I said, I know very little. I think you don't necessarily have to be anything that we physically understand either. Like you could identify as a some alien creature that you've envisioned in your own mind, and so like, or an elf, or a mythical creature that might not exist. You might feel more.
Well, now it's starting to sound like, the old stereotypes. When I was a kid, they'd say, oh, don't play Dungeons and Dragons, you'll go crazy and you'll think you're your character. Like, that kind of thing. Like, now I'm like,
they're actually
this
thinking
card from Magic.
So, but you're right, Dungeons and Dragons did this, right? Is that what you're... No, I'm just...
But I don't say, like, that's, like, I don't know the details of it.
Sure.
Huh, yeah, that's fair enough on that. That's fair enough. Interesting little thing. Correct me if I'm wrong in this, but you worked for the Tooele Transcript Bulletin.
I did it one time.
Okay, I work in Tooele.
Oh, yeah?
Okay.
So what do you talk about what you do?
No, I do
Okay,
not.
fair enough.
I'll tell you after.
Okay.
How the fuck did you get out there in crazy fucking Hickville?
I loved Tooele.
Really?
I loved it. I mean, it wasn't perfect. It had a lot of problems. I mean, I never had more children, for example. Like, if I ever thought that I was, like, cisgendered, like, Tooele made that pretty clear. Because I would, like, have kids be like, I'm a faggot! And homo and all this sort of thing. Like, more than anywhere else I've lived. But I was also at a stage in my life where that was not sort of cutting the way it might have at a time in my life.
In the place I work, I constantly kick people out for those things.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly. Like, it's just not tolerated.
Right.
Well, good. I fired an employee for saying the term bitch. I'm like, I told you once, you don't get used misogynistic terms, you're gone. Like, it just doesn't happen. And that's the one place that it happens the most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a lot of that. I mean, the thing that I like about Tooele, I guess it was kind of a reprieve. I moved out. The reason I moved out there is because I got the job.
So you didn't live out there before the job?
No.
Okay, because it's like a little family-run paper.
Yeah, by the Dunn
twice
family.
a week.
Yeah, the Dunns.
It's the weirdest little paper, and the people out there live and die by this paper.
Yeah, I mean, and that was partially what was so great about working there, is it was a community paper that people cared about, unlike a lot of community papers that have been completely sucked up and shat out the other end as this like corporate piece of work. The transcript bulletin was connected to the people felt connected to it, and that was cool.
So were you as radical when you worked there? Or just starting a radical journey?
I mean, I was definitely at a different stage in my radical journey, let's put it that way. I mean, I was certainly, oh my god, around the entire company, not just the newsroom, I was perceived as the radical, that's true. And
I can only imagine.
And, like, that's only because, like, at that time I had fairly liberal leanings or whatever, I probably told someone I cried when George W. Bush was reelected. They're like, they could hardly imagine. They're just, I liked the people out there. The thing about Tooele to me, and tell me your thoughts on this if you disagree or if you do agree, is that Tooele to me seems more sort of Western libertarian first and sort of Mormon Utah second.
Oh, totally.
Where the rest of rural Utah to me, those two things are inverted.
Like, if you look at like the actual, and maybe it's been changed, but the hardcore politics there, I mean, it's a lot of staunch Democrats are still in control on the local political level. Other places they might be called Republicans, but they're called Democrats.
Right.
But yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think that has to do with how the mining and everything else that's come over from Nevada towards, instead of moving this other way.
Yeah, Tooele's got a really interesting history. I mean, starting with early Mexican people, because let's not forget that this was Mexico at one time.
Yeah.
So the indigenous Mexicans, indigenous other types of people, and then onto a whole sort of like mixture of Eastern Europeans, like Greeks and Italians and whatnot, coming out to work on the mines, and then of course the Mormons, and so it's a real Western town. It doesn't feel like Utah to me. It feels more sort of generically, especially Western.
I would agree with that. Yeah, but it definitely has its crazy Mormon roots also.
Oh, it does. I mean, God, one of the stories I did when I was out there is this kid got suspended, not detention, suspended, because he showed up to school with like a little streak of blue in it, and they had no hair dye policy. And then they're like, well, other people dye their hair. And they're like, yeah, but they dye their hair a color that could, in theory, be natural. So they were like trying to do this whole thing. But
that same stuff is still going on out there.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I think it was either earlier this year or last year, they had to cancel the prom because as somebody came into Stansbury High, their skirt was a ½ inch too short,
Oh god.
and so they canceled the entire
Are
fucking
you for
prom.
real?
Yeah.
That's terrible. And I wonder, who is the principal?
I don't. It was one of the vice principals that did it at Stansbury. It's like their first year being open because they've been open 3 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is Terry Linares still the
I don't know.
anyways, whatever the head honcho of the whole school district is called, I forget what that person, superintendent?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, Terry Linares is an awesome person, and she's really, really cool, and I imagine she gave at least a stern talking to that assistant principal if that
Yeah.
happened. I hadn't heard that, and that's really, really awful.
I know that the head of the Tooele, who was head of the curriculum over the school, she just left last year, and apparently everything is going to shit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That might have been Terry Linares. I don't know. But she was really cool. I knew her really well because I did schools. I would go to every school board meeting and everything. That was one of my beats when I worked at the Transcript. And so I got to know those people pretty well. And it's interesting. I mean, because the thing is like, I bet that assistant principal has had a really, really hard time since then because the principal of Tooele High, I'm going to forget his name, but I'll just give him his privacy anyway. But the principal of Tooele High when I was out there had a really bad reputation for being just a total, like, sort of ridiculous authoritarian who just took things too far for no good reason. And so, you know, it's interesting. Again, that's the sort of, like, more Western than Mormon thing that people actually cared about that because Mormon culture is so authoritarian and so hierarchical that the concerns about this, you know, hard-nosed authoritarian principle would even emerge suggests Tooele is a special place.
Well, and when that happened, it was a huge backlash in the community. I mean, it was huge. I mean, people were coming into my store. Did you hear what happened? This is crazy. You know, like
yeah, absolutely.
But and I would say that they're a lot more Western in the same aspect. Like getting ready for the Black Friday, I had lots of people coming up to me talking to me about, you know, we gotta support these Walmart workers going on strike. I never would hear that anywhere else in the state. You know, so they're very more Western in that aspect of it also.
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, the Democratic Party out there that you mentioned, I mean, it's true. They have more of a presence and they have more members than elsewhere, but they themselves have been really decimated. I mean, they're on their last leg. I mean, they have Jim Gowans. You know, he was able to survive gerrymandering at least 2, if not 3 times, because he was in there for so long. They only gerrymander every 10 years. And he was able to pull through, but he just lost in the Tea Party 2010. And so losing him, and now I don't know, I can't imagine that they got a Democrat back in 2012.
I don't think they did.
No, probably not. So, I mean, the Utah Democrats everywhere are pretty much screwed, though. I mean, it's ripe. If anyone wants to play that game and wants to completely overthrow the Utah Democratic Party structure, because you're never going to have a third party, you're only going to replace one of the two the way our system works.
Well,
but
yeah,
right now is the time to do it.
Makes it so you have to have 2.
Right.
Until electoral college is reformed, we're stuck with 2.
Right. Well, not even just the electoral college, but it's what they call the single voter districts and first past the post, which means when you go and you vote for your representative, you only pick one name. You don't pick 3, 4, or 5 or whatever. And then the winner, even if they only had 50.1%, well, they don't even need 50%. They just need more than you. They get all the winnings. And so if you vote for more people on the slate and then it's sort of distributed in terms of who gets the most power, you don't just get all the power because you got the most votes. That can result in more parties. But it's something called Duverger's law. It's spelled Duverger's, to anybody who's looking it up, but it's pronounced Duverger's law. And you can predict just based on a political system how many parties they're going to end up with, and it works every time. So there's no secret about it.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right.
Anyways.
Well.
Wow.
Yeah,
we've been going on.
Yeah.
Well, it's been fun.
I'll have to talk about my additional prison stuff after.
Oh yeah, we were going to talk about
We were
that.
supposed to continue that last week, but oh well.
Well, did you want to promote anything like your Twitter or anything like that, or do you want your privacy?
Oh, no, whatever. I don't have any privacy. I just let it all hang out. So yeah, people can find me on Twitter. It's at Fruhwirth, F as in Frank, RUHWIRTH. That's the best place to get a hold of me. And I would say, you know, literally across the country, I mean, I'm going to Idaho this week to fight tar sands. That'll be my 4th state in which I've fought tar sands. And so wherever you're at, wherever you're listening to this, like, look it up. There's probably something, I mean, through the entire upper Midwest, through Michigan and Canada and whatnot, there's a pipeline going that direction. There's stuff going from Montana and Idaho through Washington over to the west. This is happening everywhere. It's really dangerous behavior. Look it up. Get involved and fight tar sands.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome.
Well, I'm bound to follow my conscience, and I'll do whatever I can. And it'll take much more than a union law to knock the fight out of a working man. And which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you